Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. So, what do you got for us today, Claire?
Today we're headed to the state that is only 112 years old. It became a state in 1912 when it became the 48th state of the Union. Any guesses?
Not a one.
It's known for the 5 C's: copper, cattle, cotton, citrus, and climate.
The citrus throws me. It makes me want to say Florida.
You see a lot of cattle in Florida, do you?
I don't, but I don't know where else.
You're not going to guess it. Arizona.
What?
It apparently took so long to become a state because people wanted to lump Arizona and New Mexico together.
Huh.
But I thought that was pretty crazy because it's a fairly young state.
I thought you were going to say like Indiana because we didn't want to claim it. I'm just kidding. Anyway.
Yeah. So we're going to hone in on the 30s and beyond.
What the hell kind of timeline is that? The 30s and beyond?
You're going to see in a second, or well, not a second, but throughout the story, I'm going to tell you. So shh.
That was not nice.
You might need a pen and paper because I feel like you're in a distracted mode. But
What? That's not fair.
I'm going to introduce Winnie Ruth McKinnell. She's born in 1905, and Dr. William Judd, who's born in 1885. Now, a little bit about our Dr. Judd. He serves in the army as a doctor during World War I. Now, he's actually hit by a German artillery shell that goes flying through the air and just has to have his name on it. And like many soldiers, he's going to end up getting morphine to treat his pain.
Uh-oh.
Now, the big difference between Dr. Judd and all those other soldiers that got morphine is all those other soldiers would be weaned off the stuff when they're healed. But this great doctor was not only a patient, but also a licensed physician, so he'd start prescribing the stuff to himself and be addicted to it.
You don't say.
He would eventually leave the military life and transition to being a civilian doctor. Now, to hide his problem, he would start a pattern of moving. Now, with every move and every new position at a hospital, he becomes lower and lower on that totem pole. Now, with one of his moves, he's going to meet 17-year-old Winnie Ruth McKinnell in 1922, who was the daughter of a minister. Now, they're going to meet and get all swoony and end up getting married. Ruth is 17 and Billy Boy is 37.
Whoa.
And a World War I veteran at this point.
And a morphine addict.
Well, they don't know that one, but I'm sure at 17, her parents were thrilled that she's marrying a doctor.
Oh, hell yeah.
So they're going to pack up and move away from Ruth's hometown of Oxford, Indiana, and head to Mexico. Since his addiction caused him to not be the best doctor, he got a job as a doctor for a copper mining company. Now, that life was very hard, but it was also hard on their marriage. Now, if that wasn't hard enough, so life wasn't what Ruth expected when she married a doctor, and if moving from everything she knew wasn't hard enough, Ruth would suffer 2 miscarriages before being told she was unable to have children.
Aww.
Which was devastating because that's all she hoped for.
Well, let's face it, back in those days, that's all women were really meant for, is breeding.
Now, to top that off, Ruth is then diagnosed with tuberculosis, and they're like, you know what? Mexico isn't the place you need to be. We're going to pack you up and send you to California to get better. Now, after a bit, she tries to return to her husband in Mexico, but her tuberculosis would flare up again with the humidity.
Hold up. He didn't go with her?
So tuberculosis isn't like a quick thing. They wanted to send her to a drier climate to recuperate. So then she'd go back, so it'll be a while. So no, he doesn't.
That's why I'm saying it'd be one thing if it was like a short, send her up there, she gets better and comes back, but it's for the long haul. You think he'd pack up and go with his wife. Especially because back then, didn't people die from tuberculosis all the time? And he's a doctor, so he knows how serious it is.
Well, maybe he was thinking that it'd be easier to part early. I don't know, but no, he doesn't go with her. He continues about his works and sends his wife to California to get a better. But this will be she goes back to Mexico after she's feeling better, but then it flares up and she'd go back to California. It'd be a ping pong thing of she's sick, she's better, she's sick. The humidity in Mexico, she can't thrive there. So it's not long before William loses his job for the copper mining company and has also burned through various other positions in that area. And considering his wife can't handle the climate, they decide to come back to the States and settle in Arizona. Now, by this point, it's 12 years into their marriage, so we're at 1930. And they would decide that, you know what? Turns out all that bouncing around and not being around each other, and now that it's for keeps, I don't really want to live with you anymore.
It's because she's no longer a teenager. He needs to move on to younger pastures.
Ew. So they'd separate, but still be in communication, which I'm just going to tell you, I didn't really understand. So now that they're in Arizona, Ruth would get a job as a governess for a well-to-do family. Now, little Ruthie would get a little too comfortable with living without a husband and develop a friendship with the neighbor, 44-year-old wealthy lumberman John Holleran, who was nicknamed Happy Jack, and he was a businessman that dabbled in politics and ran in fancy pants circles, so he was mighty attractive to our young Ruth.
How old is she now?
She's in her 20s. Anyway, she'd be all doe-eyed to Happy Jack.
Is Happy Jack married?
He is.
Ugh, hussy.
Now, Happy Jack was also a bit of a ladies' man and had the reputation for being a philanderer and a playboy, even though he was, in fact, married.
Pig.
And he sure did notice the purty lady next door.
I bet he did.
And if you don't see where this is going, then you haven't been paying real good attention.
He dips his wee-wee in her, obviously. All right.
Happy Jack and Ruth would indeed start playing hide the old pickle.
I think I know why he's called Happy Jack.
No. Eventually, Ruth would have a career change. Now, it's speculated that her employer found out that she was having rendezvous with the neighbor.
And sent her packing because, let's face it, I wouldn't have some skanky hoe bag that's willing to sleep with a married man living under my roof taking care of my children.
Yeah, because you figured it'd be only a matter of time before she looked at the mister of the house.
Exactly. Pack it up, keep it moving.
But however it happened, she would leave that position as a governess and begin working as a secretary at a medical center in Phoenix. Now, while she's there, she meets an x-ray technician, Anne Leroy, and her roommate, Hedvig Samuelson. Now, Annie and Sammy both have consumption or TB or tuberculosis, however you want to slice it. So whatever you want to dub it. And in those times, it was recommended to move to a dry climate and rest. It wasn't a cure, but it was a way to remain comfortable as long as possible in your last days, and moving to Arizona wasn't going to save them.
Just prolong the torture.
Well, these two gals were estimated to have about a year left. Now, I feel like because Ruth also has TB, that it's probably a bonding point over that one. So the three girls will get real close as friends, so much so that Ruth would actually move in with the girls for a bit. And then at some point, she finds out that they too are friends with Happy Jack. And no one says that that's the reason that Ruth eventually moves back to her apartment, but I figure it totally was.
Because she found out that they're all getting poked by Happy
Jack. I mean, again, or maybe it wasn't. But at this point, Ruth's husband, William, has checked himself into a drug rehab facility in California. So if you weren't realizing it, the doctor there is off doing his own thing with his morphine and not really keeping up with what his wife's doing.
Are they still married? I thought they went their separate ways.
So they're separated. They would randomly chit-chat, but they're not divorced.
Okay.
So it was just like, all right. I feel like he's just in love with his morphine and she's dipped out there doing their own thing separately. But now he's checked himself into a drug rehab facility in California. Then, on the night of October 16th, 1931, Anne is 27, Sammy is 24, and Ruth is 26. They'd get into a huge fight over Happy Jack. Apparently, Ruth had introduced Jack to a coworker of the girls. I figured it was one of those times maybe she was leaving work and he was right there and she was with somebody, so it's that awkward. She didn't try to introduce him to another chick. It just happened. They're right there and it's a polite thing to introduce somebody to the person they don't know. But Annie and Sammy were all, why would you introduce him to another lady? When you figure all these three ladies are diddling him. And then they're like, she has syphilis. We don't like sharing his attention as it is. And here you are introducing her to a syphilis lady. And Ruth would be all like, yeah, well, you two are probably lesbians anyway.
Oh.
And then it started the "you're a slut" kind of argument. Now, this fight would ultimately end up leaving two victims shot dead, Anne and Sarah. So we only have the version that Ruth would say this one happened. Now, I do believe they probably did get into some sort of squabble, but I'll be curious how you think it happened.
I think they were arguing over Happy Jack's wiener and where he was supposed to be poking it.
And who gave the syphilis to who. But
it's the community syphilis.
I did think it was funny of the, you two are probably lesbians. What?
Well, she only said that. I'm guessing she told that to the police at some point. That's why you're able to say that she said that. But she only said that because that was so taboo that that the media ran with that.
Well, and I think it's an excuse of, yeah, they're going to get into a fight, but she doesn't find them threatening because they're lesbians anyway. So why would she get into a fight with them over a feller that they're lesbians together?
Yeah, they're off munching carpet.
So Anne and Sarah are now tragically dead. Now it's for the cover up. At some point, I guess there's the realization that dismemberment is a lot of work because there gets to be some hacking. But only one of the bodies would be dismembered and pieced out, and the other would go into a larger shipping trunk. Now, Sarah's body would be the one dismembered, and part would be placed in a shipping trunk, another part into a smaller luggage thingamajig, and then the rest of the little odds and ends into a hat box.
Gross.
Any ideas what happens next?
She mails them to Dr. Judd.
Well, 2 days later, now October 18th, Ruth would decide to board an overnight train to LA with them. Now, mind you, they started to smell real bad, and the luggage also started to leak.
Oh.
So, luckily for Ruth, that during this time, the train station had a real problem with people smuggling deer meat.
Ew.
I did the same thing. I was like, I have never heard that was a problem. That train had to have been real stinky.
Oh.
But now the train station people all notice the baggage because of the leakiness and the smell, and they tag the bags to be opened for inspection. Now, when the train gets to the station and they're doing the unloading thing, they'll ask Ruth for the key, and she's all, I don't have it. And now by this point, Ruth's brother is there to pick her up, and she just skedaddles on out of there and leaves those trunks behind.
Good call.
The baggage handlers do another and call the police, who pick the locks of the trunk and find that that's not deer meat, but dismembered body parts. Now, again, by the time they learn this, Ruth's brother had already dropped her off, and she's disappeared for several days. Fast forward to the 19th. Now, the Phoenix police would enter the residence of Anne and Sarah, because at this point, they hadn't turned up for work. I mean, that they don't know who's in the trunks in California, but Arizona police are going to go to the residence of Anne and Sarah because they're missing. But by that point, neighbors and reporters also made their way inside the home and would destroy any hope of a crime scene with their busybodiness. Now, eventually, it's pieced together that the bodies that turned up in California were Anne and Sarah, and then the landlord would take full advantage of all the excitement and start offering tours of the home. 10 cents a person to just wander on in.
Ew.
They're real hard up for entertainment. He would even advertise in the paper for his tours.
I feel like people would do that now, so...
Yeah, but the police are trying to investigate. And as they're doing the best that they can and determine that the ladies were shot in their beds since both mattresses were missing...
Wait a minute. How does a fight end with them being shot in their beds?
I'm getting there. Because I also did the whole...
Liar, Ruth's crusty syphilis panties are on fire.
So now they eventually find one mattress, and it doesn't have blood on it, and the other one's never found. Ruth would surrender to police October 23rd, 1931, after a few days on the run. Now, she does have a gunshot wound to her left hand. Now, mind you, that's October. Her trial starts in January, so you want to talk about a speedy fucking trial.
Damn.
Now, Ruth would say initially their deaths were self-defense and that that's how she got hurt on her hand. And I guess since that didn't help her out and she ended up getting charged and going to court, she doesn't try to use the self-defense option anymore and opts to change her stance to she's innocent because she's insane.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like initially when she'll tell the police that they got into a fight, that she thought that they wouldn't charge her because she only defended herself. But turns out, if you also try to cover up the crime, dismember people, and do all the things, it sounds a little less believable that it's self defense.
Just a tad.
The prosecution would go as far as to say that they think she injured herself to make her claim of self defense more genuine.
So I sat here and mentally pictured her shooting, like putting her hand over the gun and shooting it.
Yeah. She does not testify on her
Good
behalf.
call.
It would prove to be a tough case because the prosecution would introduce the fact that weeks before the murders, the girls had a falling out over Happy Jack's affections, and that their deaths were very much premeditated. Now, mind you, they can't bring up that theory without bringing up the affair that would damage her position with the jury as being a loose woman and a homewrecker.
All true facts.
The papers would dub her the Velvet Tigress.
Ew.
So the jury will hear about the affair. Obviously, they're going to have a very poor opinion of her. And if you've watched any crime shows or anything, you don't want the jury to think you're a piece of shit because it makes it real easy for them not to have any sympathy for you at all. Now, when this is all airing out, it would also cause suspicion to grow that Ruth most likely didn't act alone, especially when you consider she's a 120-pound-year-old lady that suffers from tuberculosis.
You might want to say that again. Did you just really say she was a 120-pound-year-old lady?
I don't know, maybe. Ruth most likely didn't act alone, especially when you consider she's a 120-pound lady that has tuberculosis. And the fact that mattresses were missing, you've got large trunks. How the hell would she have moved that shit on her own? So everybody kind of turns their heads to good old Jack. He'll eventually be brought in front of a grand jury and indicted for being an accomplice. Now, a jury would not think too much of Ruth and would find her guilty of first-degree murder for Anne's death. Now, for whatever reason, they end up splitting the two cases. She's never tried for Sammy's death, just Anne's. And I think because she was found guilty of that and she's sentenced to death, they wanted to leave that one alone because there's no point in making another murder trial. But she'd be found guilty of first-degree murder of Anne and scheduled to be hanged in February of the following year.
That's fast.
Now, the January before her scheduled execution is when she would testify at Jack's trial. I thought it was interesting she'd testify at Jack's trial, but not her own.
She wasn't going down.
I guess she had a little bit of time to think of it. So, and that she didn't get her story out. But at Jack's trial, she would testify, I'm going to be hanged for something Jack Halloran is responsible for. I was convicted of murder, but I shot in self-defense. Jack Halloran removed every bit of evidence. He is responsible for me going through all of this. He's guilty of anything I am guilty of. Now, Ruth would go on to say she had gone to Anne and Sarah's house to play bridge with them, but when she got there, because in order to play bridge, you have to have 4 people, and when she got there, the 4th player had already left, and that's when they got into an argument because she was also supposed to meet up with Jack Halloran later, so it was one of those, she's not going to hang out over there, and then the mention of Jack's name started the fight over Jack. And then she would claim that that's when the 2 girls just jumped on her, viciously attacking her, and she had to fight them. Sammy would get stabbed once and then shot 3 times in the shoulder, the chest, and the head, and then Anne was shot once in the head.
A knife is involved as well?
Right.
So
the fight left Ruth shot in the left hand, then she went running back to her apartment, and Jack was already there waiting for her. Now, Jack would see her and be like, oh my god, take me back to wherever this happened. So she'd take Jack over, and he'd take in the scene, disappear into the garage before reappearing with a trunk and telling Ruth not to tell anybody what happened. And when she's cross-examined, Ruth would admit to packing the dismembered body into a trunk and the other 2 luggages 2 days after the murders, which I thought was really disgusting. But the plan was to take them to the desert and leave them there. Then they decided it was better to load them on the train and take them far away and then go dump them into the ocean. Especially since her husband and brother were both in California, it gave her the opportunity to say she was just there to visit rather than there to dump bodies.
Pretty sure it's always going to be a bad idea to say that I'm there to dump bodies, but it's just me.
But so her alibi was she's visiting people she knew, that she had a reason for being there, not that's why she loaded up her stinky, leaky suitcases.
Could have always just used the excuse of vacation.
Yeah. Well, that was the excuse to visit her husband and brother. But Jack would not take the stand for his defense, and interestingly enough, his attorney and them, I picture them sitting there, like, not really listening because they weren't taking any of it seriously. And when it would get to be the defense's turn, his attorney would just be like, dude, Ruth's testimony is nothing more than a story of an insane person. And her original story was that the women attacked her and it was self defense. So if that's true, what crime did Jack commit? And the judge is all, you have a point there. It can't be both premeditated and self defense. So the charges are dismissed and Jack would walk free because the state was wishy washy about his role and they couldn't prove anything of what he did or didn't do.
Wow.
Now, unfortunately for him, the whole scandal made his business associates not really want to be around him, and he would lose his status and appeal with the ladies.
Probably because he gave everybody syphilis.
Then he's finally forced to sell off his lumber business, tuck tail, and head out of town. He'll eventually keel over in 1939 in his early 50s.
Of syphilis?
Well, he didn't go to jail. I would say he was punished in other ways.
So I totally believe her that he helped hide the body, or the bodies.
I do too.
I think the only reason he did that is because he thought to himself, his wife is going to find out.
Yeah, that he's a man whore.
So he had to hurry up and try to get rid of two of the women that had been murdered. Because he knew it was going to tie back to him. They were fighting over his wee-wee.
Mm-hmm.
His infected wee-wee at that. Ugh.
Now you're curious about Ruth?
A little bit, yeah. She was swinging at the end of a rope, I'm guessing.
Now, if you remember, she testified at Jack's trial a month before her scheduled execution. But eventually, Ruth's execution would be overturned after a 10-day hearing that found her to be mentally incompetent. 72 hours before her execution date.
Oh.
So she would be packed up and sent to Arizona State Asylum in April 1933. Ruth would go on to escape the asylum 6 times in a period of 10 years.
Good Lord.
That was from 1933 to 1963.
1963?
Yeah, 1930. Oh.
I was like, whoa. That's not 10 years.
Okay, let me rewind. So she escapes the asylum 6 times in 10 years, but she's at that asylum from 1933 to 1963. So within a 10-year period is when she escaped 6 times. That was the state's only mental hospital, and they would say they were really understaffed. So sometimes she would just literally walk out of the prison.
Oh my gosh.
Or not the prison, but the asylum. But she escaped 6 times. So the hospital superintendent would acknowledge that it was embarrassing in the frequency she escaped. But part of it was they didn't consider her dangerous, even though she was convicted of a double murder. Or, well, she was convicted of the one murder, but even as a potential double murderer. Now, her last escape was in 63, which is her 7th escape. And she did so by befriending one of the hospital people. And they would leave her key, the key to the front door, and she'd just walk right out again. Then she would head for San Francisco Bay and get a job as a live-in maid for a well-to-do family under the name of Marion Lane. She would work for them for the next 6 years until she's discovered by chance when a police officer is working a murder case and ends up finding a fingerprint on a car. Now, she has nothing to do with the murder that's being investigated. It's just they stumble on her fingerprints and then realize she's out and about and on the lam when they're on the quest for that one. So she's picked up and carted back to Arizona in 1969. Now, when she's back in Arizona, they are like, you know what? She's sane, and we're going to switch her sentence back to being a lifer. Or, well, not back to being a lifer, but they're going to change her sentence from death to being a lifer. And now there's no escaping for her because she's going to be in jail rather than the asylum she was just swanning out of. Now, Ruth would hire a real fancy defense attorney who would pass her case to another attorney who would then get the governor of Arizona to agree to release Ruth as long as it was kept quiet. But this dipshit attorney would be so excited that he would get that agreed to that he would plan a press conference. I don't know if maybe he was just confused what hush hush meant, but that feller would get fired pronto, and Ruth would eventually get paroled instead at the end of 1971 because the governor, when it's not kept hush-hush, he backs out on that agreement when everybody's like, he's just gonna let her out.
Wow.
But it would take 2 years of legal hoopla under the conditions of being in the care of her previous employer, because she has on her side, yeah, she escaped, but she lived the last 6 years as a law-abiding citizen with a family that really cares for her, and they're willing to provide a place for her in employment if she's let back out.
Wow.
So those 2 years of all that, and she must have been one hell of a maid that you can find out that somebody is supposed to be in jail and they want her back.
Somebody's supposed to be in jail for murder and dismemberment, and you want her back? Yeah. I'd say she scrubbed the toilet.
I guess they figured she hadn't murdered them in those 6 years, and good help was real hard to find. Everybody's dying of syphilis and TB.
Turns out she's got both and a survivor.
So she gets out on parole after those 2 years, and that family in California was real happy to have their maid back. And they were so happy that they pledged to provide her a home for the rest of her days. But when that elderly wife dies at age 91,
she marries the husband.
No. The family decides they don't want Ruth living in the house anymore. And Ruth is now in her 70s and is like, you know what? Fuck this shit. And she sues them for unpaid wages from 1969 to 1982 in the amount of $40,000.
Whoa.
Now, the family rejects the claim that they owe her anything, but Ruth had the support of the Oakland Labor Commission. So Ruth comes back with, you know what? You don't want to pay me $40,000, which over that time chunk is still a bargain. So she's like, you know what? Now with the Labor Commission backing me and you're a well-to-do family, I'm going to sue for $408 million, saying that she worked for 11 years as practically an indentured servant and they had violated her civil rights. Now the family would be all, whatever, we gave you a place to live, clothes, your medical bills were taken care of, you got paid $100 a month. But Ruth was all, I worked 14-hour days, the clothes I had were my uniforms, and I was living on my Social Security check of $359, as well as the small pension that her husband had left her in 1945 when he died. And any of her medical bills were covered under Medicare. So pound sand. But she was scared to say anything at the time because she was afraid that her parole would be pulled. Now, she does go on to win her case.
Oh, shit.
Not for $408 million, though. At 77 years old, the court grants her $1,250 a month for the rest of her life, in addition to a lump sum of $50,000 to be paid to her immediately. Now, she would die at the ripe old age of 93 in California in 1998.
She sure showed them.
I can't imagine being sued for $40,000, and then when they come back, they're like, well, fuck that. Fuck the $40,000. Now it's $403 million. Did that get your attention?
I feel like that got everybody's attention. But still, if they would have just paid the $40,000 and she would have gone away, they paid a lot more than that.
But the cojones on that one. Now, all that happened in the 30s, right? I was surprised her husband didn't divorce her during the whole trial or anything. Or maybe he was just too doped up.
Yeah, he's too busy dealing with his drugs.
Right. He didn't notice, but he never quite gave up on his wife, and they stayed married until he died in October of 1945. He was only 62, but I figured he probably died of an overdose because he was just in and out of rehabs and just hitting the hard stuff.
Wow.
Now, eventually, a letter would turn up and be submitted into the archives in 2002 that was supposedly written by Ruth and was her confession that she snuck in and shot the one girl while she was sleeping and then had to fight the other one, which is why she was stabbed and shot before killing her too. But nobody ever heard that directly from Ruth, and I do believe that would make more sense than them. Why did she need to get rid of mattresses if it was self-defense? And where's all the blood in the living room if that's where they fought?
Yeah, it sounds like she shot the one girl in her bed. The other one probably woke up and came at her with a knife since there was apparently stabbing and shooting going on.
Yeah. Well, I felt like since the one girl got shot and only shot the one time, I feel like maybe they dismembered the other one to like cover up that it was shooting and stabbing. I don't know. Now, mind you, when Happy Jack is taken to the grand jury, part of it was that they figured it was either him, since he's a rugged man who can move all them mattresses and totes, but they also weren't sure if maybe her husband helped. but he's never indicted because they were saying the cuts could have been almost looked surgical.
Ugh.
Which I do think, I don't know who helped out. I would assume it was Happy Jack since he was supposed to meet up with her that night anyway.
He had the most to lose anyway. His wife, because he's a philandering piece of garbage.
Yeah. But I thought that one was wild I didn't expect it to go the route of she was supposed to be hung and then she ended up escaping. I'm so tired of reading these cases where these people are just walking out and then their excuse was we're understaffed and we didn't consider her dangerous. What?
They're understaffed and she keeps escaping. So if we let her out and just let her stay out, then it's because we did it intentionally and not because she escaped. Got it.
It was funny reading the newspaper article of the superintendent going, yes, it is embarrassing that she keeps escaping, but she's not dangerous.
She was only convicted of murder, dismemberment.
Mm-hmm.
Man, so not only did she murder 2 people, but then she also got paid.
Yeah. But I did find it interesting how she won her case of, I guess, good for you. Since they promised to provide her a home the rest of her days, it was a little shitty to be like, yeah, never mind. Because that was part of the conditions of her parole, is that family was monitoring her.
It is messed up.
But I like that she didn't take it lying down. And then she's like, you know what? They violated my civil rights. $408 million.
Good for her.
Mm-hmm.
And good for the judge or the jury, whoever decided that family did do her wrong.
Again, I just thought it was crazy that she should have been hanging from the gallows, but instead lived out a not so bad life after escaping a mental hospital. Like, how wild is that?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I wasn't surprised when she wasn't executed because I figured it was going to be one thing or another because nobody wants to hang a lady.
Yeah. And if she was crazy, you ain't supposed to hang the crazy. We saved the crazies. Apparently, we also let them out.
I don't think she was crazy.
No.
I think she was real extra jealous.
I think it was the syphilis.
And I think that's why when she told the police initially her story of self-defense and they were doing like a stink eye at her, and that's the only reason why she didn't decide to go to trial with self-defense, because they didn't buy it, so they proceeded with charging her. So that's where she was like, well, let's grasp at a different straw. I'm crazy.
Yeah. At what point did she get treated for her syphilis? That lady was disease-ridden between the tuberculosis, syphilis.
Well, she didn't have syphilis.
Yeah, okay.
It was the 2 gals got upset because she introduced Jack to another lady that they worked with, and they were all like, we already don't like sharing his free time with you. Why would you introduce him to somebody else? And that chick has syphilis. Here's a thought. If you introduce them to somebody with an STD, we're all going to get it.
Can't convince me they didn't get it.
Which I can tell you, I wouldn't be having any sort of relationship with a feller who is also diddling several other people.
No. Ew.
I mean, I don't know how much money this feller had.
Was he giving them money or was he really just good at laying the pipe?
I would assume it was his pipe laying.
Well, good for him then, what I guess.
If you pull it up the email, there's a picture of Happy Jack. Because I did the whole, I expected somebody who was like drop dead handsome and worth, well, you know what, I guess that was stupid anyway, because I can't even imagine anybody that would be worth, no.
I have to go grab my phone. I don't have the Homicide Hobbies email on this toter.
Okay.
Alright, let's see what we got here. I mean, he's not a terrible looking feller, but I wouldn't suspect him of getting all these ladies.
That's what I was saying. I was like, huh. Well, and if you scroll down.
Agnes. She looks like an Agnes or Anne. And. Are
you looking at Dr. William?
No, I was looking at Sammy. She's an interesting looking gal. That picture where she's got the fuzzy hat on, she looks a little. Oh, Dr. Judd.
Which was Ruth's husband.
He ate pretty well for back in those days. Got himself a little bit of a pot belly. All right. She's pretty. Like, she's like a plain Jane kind of pretty, though.
She looked like she could have been a movie star. Like in the 30s.
Yeah, Happy Jack really liked that hairstyle on his ladies. Because they all seem to have that short bob cut.
That was the times.
But man, I feel awful. But that lady, Sammy, she's an interesting.
Was a rough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't get it. because I get the jealousy, I guess, but she was married anyway. Like, I'm just wildly confused at all the things, but I just thought it was funny of yeah, well, you're a lesbian. What? I don't even believe that. I mean, that fight probably took place, and that's why she moved out.
Wow. I mean, if Dr. Judd is what the fellers were looking like, then Happy Jack is happy because everybody wants to play with his Jack.
Good one. He does look like he'd be a smooth talker.
Yeah.
And I guess if you've got plenty of money and smelling fancy,
Wow.
he's heading to beating them off with sticks.
He was not. He was beating them with his stick.
I think he just had to lay there, and they're just like crawling all over it.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. I am surprised it didn't go the route of his wife murdering Ruth. Who'd have known?
That's true. Could have gone that route. I think she was more or less happy that he just, I don't know.
Kept his syphilis to himself?
Pretty much, yeah. If my husband was a cheating piece of garbage, I wouldn't want to play with his Willie. And did they have kids?
But I didn't look too much in Happy Jack. It was already a case and a half of just after she escaped and then doing the whole suing and all the things after the murder that I didn't look up what Happy Jack was doing with his Jack. But I also figured maybe it was a case of if you're not in a position to, like, maybe there was a prenup since he was a wealthy feller, and if she left, her whole life would go too, and he'd probably get the kids.
If he wanted them.
Yeah, but like if that's all she wanted. I don't know any of that. I'm just saying it could be a case of it was easier for her to look the other way and continue the fancy life she liked.
Which, that's disgusting in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever works for her, I guess. Or work.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm. That's all I got.
Well, thanks for that one.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mindfucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.